Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The dust tasted of iron and regret. Kalen had known its flavor for 6 standard years, a constant grit on his tongue that no amount of recycled water could wash away. It settled on the ferrocrete blast walls of Outpost 734, on the pitted durasteel of his rifle, and in the lines around his eyes. He stood on the perimeter wall, a lone figure against the bruised twilight of Tartarus 7, a world that had been forgotten by gods and cartographers alike until the Xylos Corporation found its pulse. A weak, profitable pulse. He was a guardian of that profit, a scarecrow in scuffed body armor. His job was simple: walk the wall, watch the gray horizon, and ensure the corporation's monolithic drills continued their slow, grinding rape of the planet's crust without interruption. The war had ended a decade ago, but it had never really left him. It had merely changed its name to contract and its uniform to the dull gray of a corporate security officer. The pay was steady. The silence was absolute. It was enough. Below him, the compound hummed with the strained thrum of power conduits and atmospheric processors. It was an ugly, functional scar on the landscape, a place of right angles and perpetual, sterile light that held the crushing darkness at bay. Kalen's world had been reduced to these predictable patterns: the 12-hour shift, the metallic tang of nutrient paste, the low-gravity ache in his bones. He was a ghost haunting the machine, his past a collection of faded specters he refused to acknowledge. Disillusionment was a quiet, comfortable armor. His patrol ended, as it always did, at the entrance to sublevel Gamma. The air grew colder here, the hum of the outpost replaced by the deeper, more sinister thrum of the containment field. This was the heart of the operation, the reason for the secrecy and the battalion of corporate mercs disguised as guards. He keyed in his access code, the heavy blast door hissing open to reveal a long, white corridor that smelled of ozone and cold dread. At the end of the corridor was the observation chamber, a semicircular room of reinforced plasteel overlooking a cavernous containment cell. And in the center of that cell, suspended in a shimmering column of blue energy, was Specimen Zero. That was the official designation. The miners who had unearthed it, before they were shipped off-world with a fat bonus and a non-disclosure agreement that carried a death sentence, had called it the Crystal Ghost. It was humanoid, feminine in shape, but its body was composed of a substance that defied easy description. It was like living, semi-translucent quartz, shot through with veins of soft, internal light. It was dormant, held in a state of perfect stasis, its limbs arranged in a pose of serene repose. To the scientists and Administrator Thorne, it was a power source, a biological battery of unprecedented potential. To the guards who pulled the Gamma shift, it was a monster in a cage. A beautiful, terrifying thing that made the hairs on their arms stand up. Kalen looked at it not as a source of power or a monster, but as a prisoner. It was a distinction that had formed in his mind over countless silent hours spent in this sterile room. He saw the tension in its crystalline form, the subtle lines of stress that the energy field was meant to suppress. He had seen the same thing in the faces of captured insurgents on Kythera, the same silent, screaming resistance against the cage. Ahe ran the diagnostic, his fingers moving over the console with practiced apathy. All systems green. Field integrity at 100%. Biosignatures nominal, which was corporate speak for still inert. It was another Tuesday. He settled into the observer's chair, the old rifle across his lap, and prepared to watch nothing happen for the next 6 hours. The first sign of trouble was a flicker. The brilliant white lights of the observation chamber wavered, dipping into a sickly yellow for a fraction of a second. Kalen was on his feet instantly, his hand instinctively going to the rifle. A low, groaning sound echoed from deep within the facility's superstructure, the sound of a colossal machine under immense strain. On the console, red lights began to blossom like poisonous flowers. Main power fluctuated. Auxiliary generators were kicking in, but struggling. A system-wide cascade failure. He had seen drills overload before, but never like this. A klaxon began to blare, a rhythmic, hateful pulse that vibrated through the deck plates. His eyes snapped to the containment cell. The blue energy column was wavering violently, its surface rippling like disturbed water. The Specimen Zero, was no longer serene. Its form was convulsing, and the soft light within it was now a frantic, strobing silver. A warning rune flashed on the diagnostic panel. Secondary restraint failure imminent. He saw them then. The magnetic shackles clamped around its crystalline wrists and ankles, glowing cherry red as they overloaded. Protocol was clear. He was to trigger a full lockdown, flood the chamber with sedative gas, and reinforce the primary field. His finger hovered over the red panel. But he was looking at the creature, at the way its form twisted, and he didn't see a weapon breaking free. He saw an animal in a trap, thrashing as the steel teeth bit deeper. The internal light flared, and for a barest moment, he thought he felt something brush against his mind, a wave of pure, unadulterated agony. It was not a thought. It was an impulse, born from a part of him he thought had died in the war. A flicker of something that rejected the cold calculus of protocol. He bypassed the lockdown command. His fingers flew across the console, entering an override code he was not supposed to know, a maintenance command he had observed a technician using weeks ago. He targeted the secondary restraints. Disengage magnetic shackles, the synthesized voice of the computer announced, its calm tone a jarring contrast to the rising chaos. He pressed the confirmation key. With a sharp crack of discharged energy, the red-hot shackles around the specimen's limbs fell away. For a moment, it hung there, free of the secondary restraints. The frantic light within it softened, the violent convulsions ceasing. It uncurled slowly, its head lifting. And through the shimmering, unstable containment field, its featureless face turned directly toward the plasteel window. Toward him. Then the world dissolved into light and sound. The primary containment field shattered with a sound like a star breaking apart. A wave of kinetic force blew the reinforced window inward, throwing Kalen across the room. He slammed into the far wall, his head cracking against the metal, and the world swam in a haze of pain and screaming alarms. The blast door at the end of the corridor slammed shut, its heavy thud a note of finality. He was trapped with it. He pushed himself up, his vision clearing, his ears ringing. The observation room was a wreck of shattered plasteel and sparking consoles. He looked into the containment chamber. It was empty. The creature was gone. A soft chiming sound came from beside him. He turned his head, his muscles screaming in protest. It was standing there, not 3 meters away, its crystalline body absorbing and refracting the emergency strobes, making it look like a being of shattered rainbows. It was taller than he had realized, slender and impossibly graceful. It made no move toward him, simply stood there, observing him with a tilt of its head. The air around it was cold, charged with a power that felt ancient and vast. Heavy, metallic boot steps pounded on the other side of the blast door. Shouts, muffled and frantic. Breach in Gamma. Seal the sector. Forlag wants all fire teams mobilized now. Kalen knew Forlag. The man was Thorne's attack dog, a zealous brute who valued protocol above life. They would not try to reason. They would not try to recapture. They would simply try to destroy. He was a traitor, a saboteur. His life, measured in corporate contracts and pay cycles, was over. The creature took a silent step toward him. He flinched, raising his rifle, the rusted barrel a pathetic ward against such a being. It stopped. It raised one slender, crystalline hand, not in a threat, but in a gesture that was almost questioning. The light within its palm pulsed with a soft, golden hue. Move it. Cut through the door. Forlag's voice, amplified and distorted by his helmet comms, cut through the din. A high-pitched whine began as a plasma cutter started to score a line across the thick metal. They would be through in minutes. He was trapped between the monster and the men who would kill them both without a second thought. He looked from the glowing orange line appearing on the door to the silent, waiting creature. It had not harmed him. It had been in agony, and he had, for some inexplicable reason, freed it. His action, his consequence. The creature turned its head toward a solid wall, a section of the facility that, according to the schematics in his head, led to the old, abandoned mining tunnels. It looked back at him, then at the wall again. It was an invitation, an offer of escape. He had no reason to trust it, no reason to believe it would not tear him apart the moment they were clear. But the alternative was Forlag. With a groan, he got to his feet, grabbing his rifle. The plasma cutter was halfway through the door. He gave a sharp, jerky nod. All right, he breathed, the word lost in the noise. All right. It seemed to understand. It glided to the wall, placing its palm flat against the cold, reinforced concrete. The soft light within its body flowed down its arm and into the wall. There was no sound, no explosion. The concrete simply dissolved. It turned to gray dust and trickled to the floor, leaving a perfectly smooth, man-sized opening that led into utter blackness. The creature looked back at him one last time, then slipped through the opening, disappearing into the dark. The plasma cutter finished its circuit on the blast door. Heavy rams began to pound against the weakened metal. Kalen took one last look at the ruined observation room, at the life that had just ended, and plunged into the darkness after the ghost. The tunnels were a labyrinth of forgotten industry. The air was stale, thick with the metallic scent of unsheathed rock and the ghosts of dead machinery. The only light came from the creature ahead of him, the soft, internal luminescence of its body casting long, dancing shadows that made the darkness seem alive. He followed, his hand trailing along the rough-hewn wall, his rifle held tight against his chest. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a counterpoint to the distant, fading sounds of the alarm. They moved in silence for what felt like hours. He was a soldier again, every sense on a knife's edge, listening for the telltale scrape of a boot or the whine of a corporate drone. The creature moved with an unnatural fluidity, gliding over rubble and debris without a sound. It seemed to know these tunnels, navigating the maze of collapsed shafts and intersecting corridors with an unerring sense of direction. He was utterly dependent on it, a thought that sat uneasily in his gut. He began to think of it as her. The shape was feminine, the grace of her movements undeniable. It was easier than thinking of her as it, or the specimen. It gave a name, however temporary, to the being that now held his life in its crystalline hands. Distantly, he heard the buzz of a seeker drone. It was a high-pitched, insect-like sound that echoed through the tunnels. He froze, pressing himself into an alcove. The creature paused, her light dimming until she was barely a whisper of silver in the oppressive dark. The drone's buzzing grew louder, its searchlight cutting a sharp cone of white through the blackness ahead. It swept the tunnel, past their hiding place, and continued on. They waited, motionless, until the sound faded completely. She brightened slightly, a signal to move on. There was a strange efficiency to their nonverbal communication, a language of light and shadow, of motion and stillness. He found himself watching her, studying the subtle shifts in the colors that moved beneath her translucent skin. Blue seemed to be calmness, silver was alertness, and the frantic white he had seen in the cell was pure agony. They were forced to the surface by a collapsed tunnel, emerging through a fissure at the base of a towering rock spire. The twin moons of Tartarus 7 cast a pale, spectral light over a landscape of utter desolation. They were in the Badlands now, a vast expanse of salt flats and razor-sharp rock formations carved by millennia of acidic winds. The air was thin and caustic, and Kalen immediately pulled the rebreather from his pack, the filtered air a welcome relief from the acrid burn in his lungs. She seemed unaffected, standing atop the ridge and surveying the alien vista as if it were home. And perhaps, he realized it was. The pursuit was not far behind. A low-flying corporate skimmer swept across the flats, its powerful searchlight tracing patterns on the gray, cracked earth. They were exposed here, with nowhere to hide. Kalen pulled her down behind a cluster of jagged rocks, his hand closing around her arm. It was like gripping a column of cool, vibrating crystal. She offered no resistance, sinking down beside him, her light dimming once more. The skimmer made another pass, closer this time. The rhythmic thrum of its engines was a physical pressure against his chest. He risked a glance over the rock. It was an Enforcer-class vessel, armed with a rotating chain gun and a sniper pod. Forlag's men. A single, sharp glint of light from the skimmer caught his eye. A sniper, deploying his optics. They were being painted. The shot would come in seconds. There was no time to run, no cover deep enough. He acted without thinking. He rolled onto his back, bringing the old rifle to his shoulder. It was a relic, a kinetic firearm in an age of plasma and lasers, scavenged from a forgotten cache in the tunnels. The other guards had laughed at it. That rusted piece of junk won't even fire, one had sneered. Kalen had spent weeks cleaning it, machining new parts in the workshop, learning its weight and its balance. It was solid. It was real. He found the sniper's perch in his scope, a dark shape against the skimmer's running lights. A fool shot. The target was moving, over 800 meters away, buffeted by the wind. He controlled his breathing, letting the air out slowly, the way his first instructor had taught him a lifetime ago. He ignored the whine of the skimmer, the pounding of his own blood in his ears. There was only the rifle, the target, and the space between. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against his shoulder, the crack of the shot shockingly loud in the silence of the Badlands. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a tiny spark blossomed on the side of the skimmer. The sniper's optics shattered, and the high-powered rifle discharged uselessly into the sky. The skimmer, suddenly blind and confused, banked sharply and retreated, its searchlight now flickering erratically. Kalen lowered the rifle, a thin wisp of smoke curling from the barrel. He had not aimed for the sniper, but for his equipment. A kill shot would have brought the whole pack down on them. A disabled system bought them time. He let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding and turned his head. She was looking at him. The light within her was a steady, soft gold. She reached out, her slender fingers tracing the line of the rifle's stock. There was no sound, but he felt a clear, distinct impression in his mind: gratitude. It was warm and startlingly clear. They pressed on, moving deeper into the Badlands. The brief alliance of necessity was beginning to shift into something else. He had protected her. An hour later, she returned the favor. Their path ended at a chasm, a deep, black wound in the earth hundreds of meters across. There was no way to cross. As he stood on the edge, calculating the impossibility of their situation, she walked past him to the precipice. She held her hands out over the void, palms up. The golden light inside her intensified, flowing from her body and coalescing in the air between the two cliffs. It spun and wove itself into solid strands, hardening into a bridge of pure, shimmering light, as solid and real as steel. He stared, dumbfounded. He had seen power, but this was something else. This was creation. She looked back at him and gestured toward the bridge. He hesitated for only a second before stepping onto it. The surface was warm and hummed with a faint energy, but it held his weight without question. He walked across the impossible bridge, and when he reached the other side, he turned to watch as she followed, the structure dissolving back into motes of light behind her. They were a team now, a soldier with his ghost. The journey became a singular, grinding ordeal that blurred the days and nights. They moved through canyons where the wind howled like a tortured animal, its breath laden with corrosive sand that scoured any exposed surface. Kalen's armor became a tapestry of scratches and dents, a record of their passage. They weathered storms of black, acidic rain that sizzled on the rocks, forcing them to take shelter in shallow caves where the air was cold and thin. Through it all, she was his guide. She navigated the treacherous landscape with an innate understanding, finding hidden springs of pure water deep beneath the salt flats, and identifying phosphorescent fungi in the caves that were safe to eat. The nutrient paste in his pack had run out days ago. He now survived on what this dead world, and she provided. Their language evolved beyond simple gestures. He learned that a slow pulse of emerald light meant safety, while a sharp, violet flicker was a warning of unstable ground. He began to feel her emotions more clearly, not as words, but as direct impressions. A deep, resonant sorrow when they passed a vast, open pit left by the corporation's strip mining operations. A flicker of curiosity when she examined the intricate mechanics of his rifle. He gave her a name, speaking it aloud one night as they huddled for warmth against a geothermal vent. Aura, it felt right. The light that was her life, her language. She turned her head, and the soft blue glow within her form seemed to brighten in acknowledgement. They found the sanctuary by following a vein of quartz that ran like a silver nerve through a mountain of black basalt. The entrance was hidden behind a waterfall of fine, black sand, a place no corporate scanner would ever find. Inside, the air was still and warm. The cavern was immense, a natural cathedral whose ceiling was lost in darkness, and it was filled with others like her. They were all dormant, dozens of crystalline figures embedded in the cavern walls or standing like statues on the floor, their internal light reduced to a bare, faint glimmer. It was a tomb, a place of waiting. Aura drifted among them, her hand gently touching one, then another. The sorrow he felt from her was overwhelming, a lament that echoed in the vast, silent space. She led him to the center of the cavern, where a single, massive crystal grew from the floor, pulsing with a gentle, rhythmic light like a slumbering heart. She placed her hand upon it, and then gestured for him to do the same. He hesitated, then laid his palm next to hers on the smooth, warm surface. His mind erupted. It was not a psychic attack, but an opening. A flood of images, sensations, and pure knowledge poured into him. He saw this world not as Tartarus 7, but as crystalline, a vibrant planet teeming with life. He saw her people, the Lumina, living in communion with the planet, their lives tied to the energy that flowed from its core. They were not biological in the way he understood it. They were sentient geological formations, their consciousness woven into the very fabric of the world. He saw the arrival of the Xylos Corporation. He saw the first drills, giant steel fangs, biting deep into the flesh of the planet. He felt the pain as the drills tapped into the energy conduits that were the Lumina's lifeblood, siphoning their essence away. He saw them being ripped from the earth, their connection to the planet severed, forcing them into a state of agonizing dormancy. The corporation was not mining a resource, they were harvesting a soul. He saw Administrator Thorn, his face a cold mask of ambition on a holographic screen, ordering the acceleration of the project. Thorn knew. He knew they were sentient. He knew he was committing a slow, systematic genocide for profit. Specimen 0, Aura, was the first one they had managed to capture relatively intact, a prize to be studied and weaponized. The vision ended, leaving him gasping, his hand still pressed against the heart crystal. He stumbled back, the weight of the truth crushing him. He had been a part of it. A guard, a cog in a machine of extinction. The cynicism he had worn like armor was stripped away, leaving him raw and exposed. This was not a contract. This was a war, and he had been fighting for the wrong side. He looked at Aura, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the network of fine, hairline fractures across her shoulders and back, legacy of the mining equipment that had torn her from her home. They were scars. He instinctively reached up and touched the thick, ragged scar on his own neck, a piece of shrapnel from a grenade on Kythera that had nearly taken his head. A reminder of a different war, a different betrayal. She stepped closer and gently placed her crystalline fingers over his hand, her touch cool against his scarred skin. A simple, profound understanding passed between them. They were both survivors, both scarred by systems that treated life as a disposable commodity. In that moment of shared vulnerability, his fight became her fight. He was no longer just her protector. He was her ally. His purpose, which he had thought long dead and buried, had been unearthed in a cave of sleeping ghosts. The relative peace of the sanctuary was shattered by the distant, rhythmic thud of seismic charges. Thorn had found them. Kalen felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He had known they would be hunted, but he had hoped for more time. He scrambled to the cavern entrance, peering through the curtain of black sand. On the horizon, the sky was filled with the dark shapes of corporate transports and heavy gunships. Below them, ground vehicles were deploying, forming a perimeter around the mountain base. It was not a capture mission. It was an army. Thorn had sent his entire private military force, a legion of mercenaries and automated war machines. Leading them, standing in the open hatch of the lead gunship, was the unmistakable, bull-like figure of Commander Forlag. Aura was beside him, the light within her a hard, sharp violet. The dormant lumina in the cavern began to stir, their internal light flickering weakly, roused by the violent intrusion. A few of them, near the entrance, began to pull themselves free from the rock, their forms slow and unsteady after a long, forced slumber. Forlag's voice boomed over an external address system, the sound waves physically shaking the sand around them. Kalen, the traitor, you have aligned yourself with a corporate asset. A thing. Surrender it, and you will be granted a quick death. Resist, and we will sterilize this entire mountain range. He won't listen to reason, Kalen muttered, pulling back from the entrance. He knew men like Forlag. They saw the world in black and white, in protocol and its violation. There was no room for negotiation. The first shots came moments later. Not small arms fire, but heavy artillery. Shells screamed overhead and impacted against the mountainside, shaking the very foundations of the sanctuary. Rock and dust rained down from the cavern ceiling. The newly awakened Lumina moved to defend their home. They flowed out of the cavern, not as soldiers, but as forces of nature. One raised its hands, and a wall of solid rock erupted from the ground, absorbing a volley of plasma fire. Another seemed to bend the light around itself, becoming a shimmering, indistinct blur as it disabled a corporate tank with a focused kinetic blast. They were magnificent. They were powerful. And they were hopelessly outnumbered. Kalen joined the fight, finding a defensible ledge near the entrance. He used the old rifle with deadly precision, targeting officers, communication arrays, and weapon emplacements. He was a ghost, his shots coming from the shadows, sowing confusion. Beside him, Aura acted as his shield. She deflected incoming fire with shimmering walls of force, her movements a fluid dance of defensive energy. They fought back to back, a seamless unit of flesh and crystal. But for every tank they disabled, 3 more took its place. For every fire team he suppressed, a dozen more advanced under the cover of overwhelming firepower. The awakened Lumina, weakened from their long stasis, began to fall. Their light extinguished with a final, silent pulse, their crystalline bodies shattering into inert shards. The defense was crumbling. As the battle raged, a new and more terrible threat emerged. A colossal shadow fell over the battlefield. Kalen looked up, and his blood ran cold. It was the Deadless, the corporation's planetary drilling platform, moved from its primary site and now hovering directly over the mountain. A weapon of mass excavation, it was a spiderweb of durasteel and power conduits, with a central drill head the size of a city block. It was not positioned to mine. It was aimed directly at the heart of the mountain, at the sanctuary, at the heart crystal. Thorne's voice, calm and chillingly indifferent, replaced forelags on the address system. The asset has proven too volatile to contain. Therefore, we will proceed with terminal liquidation of the source. The drill will activate in 10 minutes. We will harvest the energy released from the planet's core directly. A far more efficient method. It was a doomsday weapon, an act of planetary vivisection. Activating it would not just destroy the sanctuary. It would shatter the planet's core, extinguish every last Lumina, and reduce Tartarus 7 to a dead, sterile rock. Kalen saw the endgame. It was never about a single specimen. It was about owning the entire world, down to its molten heart. Victory was impossible. They could not fight a drilling platform. They could not fight a fleet. They were losing the ground battle, and the sky held a threat that would render it all meaningless. A wave of utter hopelessness washed over him. He had found a cause only to watch it be annihilated. Aura touched his arm. He turned to face her. The violet light of battle was gone, replaced by a deep, somber cobalt. She pressed her palm against his forehead, and once again, his mind was opened. She showed him a final truth. A last, desperate option. The Lumina were one with the planet. Their life force was tied to the energy of the core. That connection could be used. One of them could merge with the heart crystal, could descend into the planet's core and become its new consciousness, its new guardian. The act would consume the individual entirely, their identity dissolving into the planetary whole. But in doing so, they could stabilize the core and project a shield of pure energy, a field that would encompass the entire world, making it impenetrable to any outside force. It would save her people. It would save the planet. But it was an act of ultimate self-destruction. He saw her intent in the vision. She was the strongest, the only one fully awakened and capable of initiating the ritual. She would be the sacrifice. The vision faded. He stared at her, the roar of the battle, the whine of the descending drill, all of it fading into a dull background hum. He shook his head, a violent, negative motion. No, he had not freed her from one cage just to let her throw herself into another, permanent one. He had not fought to protect her only to stand aside and watch her cease to exist. There has to be another way, he said, the words feeling useless and small. He looked at his rifle. A weapon. He was a soldier. Soldiers fought. They blew things up. They could get to the drill, plant explosives, disable it. It was a mad, suicidal plan, but it was a plan. It was something other than this surrender. But as he looked out at the overwhelming force assembled against them, at the impossibly vast machine descending from the sky, he knew it was a fantasy. He was one man with a rifle. His entire life had been defined by violence, by fighting for causes he barely understood against enemies he never knew. He had followed orders, he had fought for pay, he had killed and bled and survived. And what had it achieved? The wars always led to more wars. The fighting never ended. It only changed location. He looked at Aura. She offered a way to end it. Not to win a battle, but to end the war. To remove the board itself from the game. Her solution was not about destruction, but about protection. It was a sacrifice born of love for her home, for her people. It was a concept so alien to his own experience that it took his breath away. The drill head began to spin, its low groan escalating into a ground-shaking roar. Less than 5 minutes now. He felt the weight of his own past, a lifetime of cynical survival. He had always fought for himself, to live another day, to collect another paycheck. When had he ever truly fought for something bigger, for a future he might not be a part of? He looked at the heart crystal, pulsing in the center of the cavern. He thought of the consciousness, the will, required to merge with an entire planet, to hold it together, to become its guardian. It would require a strength he could not imagine, an act of supreme will. But the Lumina were a gentle, ancient race. Could they endure such a thing? Could Aura? Then he considered himself a human, stubborn, resilient, filled with a lifetime of rage and regret and a single, newly discovered spark of purpose. Perhaps a human will, forged in the fires of meaningless conflict, was exactly what was needed. A grit and anger that could be turned outward, not as a weapon, but as a shield. A decision settled in his soul, quiet and absolute. It was not a choice he made with logic, but with a certainty that resonated from a place deeper than thought. His war was over. This would be his final mission. He turned to Aura, the chaos of the battle outside fading into irrelevance. The world narrowed to the two of them in the glowing heart of the mountain. He did not have the words to explain his choice, and he knew she would not accept them anyway. So he acted. He walked past her, his boots heavy on the crystalline floor. He went to the great heart crystal, its light washing over him, and placed his palm flat against its surface. It was the same gesture she had used to show him the truth. Now, he used it to declare his own. He pushed his intent into the crystal. Not a vision, but a feeling. A declaration. Let me do it. I will be the shield. My fight is over. Let me protect your home. Aura rushed to his side, her form flashing a brilliant, distressed crimson. She placed her hand over his, trying to pull it away. A torrent of protesting emotions flooded his mind. Sorrow, refusal, a desperate plea for him not to take this from her. He did not pull his hand away. He simply looked at her, meeting the faceless gaze of the being who had remade him. He channeled every ounce of his resolve, every scar, every failure, every moment of his broken life into a single, unshakable conviction. He was a weapon, and he was finally choosing his own target. Not to destroy, but to save. He felt her resistance falter. Her protest softened into a wave of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. She understood. She saw that his will was absolute, that his path was now set. The crimson light of her form softened back to a deep, mournful blue. Her fingers gently interlaced with his on the crystal's surface. It was not an act of struggle, but of acceptance, of a shared, solemn farewell. The drill was screaming now, its shadow blotting out the sky. It was time. Together, they fought their way out of the sanctuary and toward the main corporate encampment. The plan was insane, but it was the only one they had. The heart crystal was the focus, but the energy had to be channeled, and the most direct conduit to the planet's core was the drill itself. Kalen had to reach the control center, reverse the energy flow, and use their own weapon against them. It was a storm of fire and light. Aura moved like a wraith at his side, creating shields of force that deflected plasma bolts and explosive rounds. Kalen moved like the soldier he had always been, his rifle a precise instrument of death. He did not waste shots. Every round found its mark, disabling heavy weapon emplacements and taking down squad leaders. They were two parts of a single destructive purpose, an avenging angel of crystal and a grim human ghost. They breached the perimeter and fought their way through the prefabricated corridors of the command center. Alarms blared, and corporate soldiers, clad in black armor, threw themselves in their path. They fell like wheat before a scythe. Kalen was a machine of cold fury, his movements economical, his aim perfect. All the years of pointless violence were now honed to a single, meaningful point. The final obstacle was the command deck, a vast chamber dominated by a holographic projection of the planet and the descending drill. And waiting for them, flanked by his elite Praetorian guard, was Commander Forlag. He held a high-frequency vibroblade, its edge humming with deadly energy. "Traitor," Forlag snarled, his voice stripped of its amplified boom, now just the raw hatred of a fanatic. "You will die for your heresy." Kalen didn't waste a word. He fired his last round into the chest of a guardsman and dropped the empty rifle. He drew the heavy combat knife from his belt. As Aura engaged the remaining guards, turning the air around them into a vortex of kinetic force, Kalen charged Forlag. It was a brutal, close-quarters fight. The vibroblade was faster, more powerful, but Kalen was fueled by a purpose that transcended mere fanaticism. He parried the humming blade with his knife, the impact jarring his arm to the shoulder. He took a cut across his ribs, the pain a distant, unimportant fact. He was a dead man already. All that mattered was the mission. He drove forward, inside Forlag's guard, and slammed the hilt of his knife into the commander's throat. Forlag staggered back, choking, his eyes wide with disbelief. Kalen drove the knife into the weak spot under his arm, ending it. He didn't spare the body a glance. He turned to the main control console. Administrator Thorne was there on the main view screen, his face a mask of cold fury, screaming orders that were lost in the chaos. He was safe on his orbital command ship, a coward watching his kingdom burn. Kalen slammed his fist onto the console, shattering the screen and Thorne's face with it. He found the energy conduit controls. Aura was beside him now, the last of the guards neutralized. She placed her hand on his shoulder, a final, silent farewell. He keyed in the commands, not to retract the drill, but to open its core conduit wide. A piercing whine filled the room as the safety protocols were overridden. The central column of the control deck began to glow with terrifying intensity. This was the point of no return. He stepped onto the channeling plate, directly over the open conduit. He gave Aura one last look. The image of her, a being of sorrowful, beautiful blue light, was the last thing he saw with human eyes. Then he initiated the final command. Pain. It was a fire that consumed him from the inside out. His body was unmade, every cell torn apart and converted into raw energy. It was an agony beyond comprehension, a scream that had no voice. He felt his bones turn to dust, his flesh to light. But beneath the pain, his consciousness remained. His will, his human stubbornness, held it together. He was no longer Kalen. He was a stream of pure energy, pouring down the drill's conduit, a river of vengeful purpose flowing into the heart of the world. He plunged through miles of rock and magma, an arrow of pure sentience. He felt the planet's core, a vast, sleeping consciousness, the source of all the lumina. It was weak, dying, being bled dry. He merged with it. He wrapped his own consciousness around it, not to dominate, but to reinforce. He poured his own life force, his anger, his regret, his final, desperate hope into it. He felt his mind expand at an exponential rate, his awareness spreading from the core outward. He was the rock. He was the magma. He was the thin, caustic atmosphere and the pale, spectral light of the moons. He was the entire planet. And he felt the drill, the metal parasite, still boring into his new body. With a final, focused surge of will, he pushed back. On the surface, the battle stopped. Every soldier, every machine, froze as a wave of golden energy erupted from the ground. It was not an explosion. It was a silent, profound pulse of pure cessation. It washed over the battlefield, and every weapon powered down. Every engine died. The lights on the corporate vehicles flickered and went dark. The deadless drilling platform, caught in the full force of the energy wave, was vaporized. One moment it was there, a symbol of corporate might. The next, it was nothing but fine, glowing dust. The wave expanded, reaching into the upper atmosphere, and the corporate fleet, including Thorne's command ship, was rendered inert. They were dead in space, their systems fried, their power gone. The fighting was over. The war was lost and won in a single, silent instant. Aura stood alone amidst the silenced battlefield, her light a brilliant gold that mirrored the hum of the world beneath her feet. She looked up at the sky, at the now impenetrable, glowing planet, and felt a single, clear thought resonate across the surface. Not in words, but in a feeling of profound, eternal peace. And of thanks. 10 years passed. The world once known as Tartarus 7 was now called crystalline by the galactic community, a quarantined pearl of a world, protected by an energy field that no ship could penetrate. The catastrophic collapse of the Xylos Corporation, following the Tartarus event, had sent shockwaves through the corporate-controlled sectors, leading to reforms and the liberation of a dozen other exploited worlds. The truth, pieced together from the garbled final transmissions of Thorn's fleet, had come out. The Lumina thrived. Awakened from their long slumber by the revitalized core, they had rebuilt their world, not with cities of metal and plastic, but with living, crystalline structures that sang in harmony with the planet's energy. Aura was their leader, a guide who taught them of the world outside, of the strange, short-lived, and unexpectedly profound species called humans. She stood now in the heart of their central city, a place of soft light and gentle chimes. Before her was a monument, the only one of its kind on the entire planet. It was not a grand statue or a glowing crystal. It was a simple, man-sized column of unadorned, gray basalt, the same rock that had formed the mountains of the Badlands. It was rough, solid, and stubbornly real. It was not a likeness of the man, for the Lumina had no concept of such things. It was a memorial to his essence. An inscription was carved at its base in the universal trade language, the only text on the entire world. It was simple, direct, and contained a universe of meaning. It read, "He gave us our world." Aura reached out and placed her hand on the cold stone. For a brief moment, the entire planet seemed to exhale, and a soft, golden hum resonated through the air, the ground, and the crystal spires. It was a silent acknowledgement from the guardian who watched over them all, the quiet hero whose sacrifice had bought a peace that would now endure for millennia. The cost had been absolute, the legacy, eternal. She stood there for a long time, a lone, luminous figure paying tribute to the jaded soldier who had found his purpose at the end of all things.